Joining us right now is conservative international trade critic Adam Chambers. Mr. Chambers, welcome back to Power Play.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
I want to start sort of where Mr. Poilievre left off there. Now, he says he's confident that every single one of the MPs in your caucus will be voting no against the budget. Do you have that type of confidence as well, or do you think that there could be some abstentions? And the reason I ask is because on that sub-amendment, or the amendment and sub-amendment last week, we had Matt Jeneroux, who did abstain.
Well, I expect on Monday, which is the the main vote, that the Conservatives will be present and voting no. I can speak for myself when I say that. We've been fairly consistent about that, even in the lead up to the budget, in our requests from what we would like the government to have included, or compromises that we would have expected or suggested that the government make in order to achieve Conservative support. As you mentioned, there's only 2 votes that are required for the budget to pass. It is not a high hurdle for that government, or for the government to meet, and I am told or understand that the government is in negotiations with other party leaders, including Ms. May, about potentially securing their support, and frankly encourage them to do so. You know, I recall in 2008, 2009, and in those minority parliament days, it was Prime Minister Harper and Jim Flaherty's responsibility to ensure that their government budget passed so that the government could continue and not have an election. So I'd expect that Prime Minister Carney would be doing the same thing.
When you say you encourage them to do that, it's because you don't want an election, or do you just want to see this budget passed?
Well, the results of the last election were that the Liberal Party did not achieve enough votes to get the majority of the seats in the House of Commons, and so I think that is an implicit request or an implicit instruction from the people to have multiple parties work together. As I said, the Conservatives made some fairly specific and reasonable requests in terms of capping the size of the deficit. Even if the Prime Minister would have kept close to what he promised during the election, which was a $62 billion deficit. We're now at 78. That is quite the miss. It's also almost double what Prime Minister Trudeau had suggested just about a year ago, including additional support for people who purchase houses, taking the GST off of homes. The government has suggested they'll only do that for first-time purchasers. That's only a few thousand people a year. We said we would remove and defer capital gains, or suggested the government defer capital gains for Canadians or Canadian companies who sell assets in Canada but want to reinvest those assets here. These were a few of the ideas that we had put forward that we would say would help Conservatives vote for the budget, but the Prime Minister did not take us up on that, and instead introduced an even larger deficit that he promised during the election. So I think for Conservatives, it's actually quite an easy discussion. It is a discussion that we have had, but it is an easy decision. I ran in 2021 because I thought Prime Minister Trudeau was spending too much money. So this is just by and far well in advance of what the Prime Minister had even ran on just 6 months ago.
I want to dig into the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report that he put out today and some of his findings. Specifically, you know, breaking apart the budget, he highlighted that. Are the Conservatives opposed to that, breaking it into capital and operating streams?
Well, I would say 2 things. First is politicians will likely always take the opportunity to justify additional spending. Make no mistake, splitting the budget into capital and operating is the justification that the government uses to have larger and run larger deficits. So that's the first challenge that we have. On its face, like from a theoretical perspective, you can understand why some people don't mind splitting this out. However, even if you agreed with splitting capital and operating, the Parliamentary Budget Officer also says that the government's definitions of capital are way too broad. Even in the government's own budget, they compare what other countries do when they split out capital and operating. They did not find another country that treated tax credits to corporations as capital spending. They offered no comparable country that did that. That is an overly broad definition of capital. That is what the Parliamentary Budget Officer is talking about when he says it's a broad definition. This government is including things in the capital spending ledger that are just, frankly, operational spending in any other jurisdiction. So even if you were attracted to that kind of delineation, I do think it raises some challenges with respect to the government's classifications of capital and operating. But the bottom line is, the amount of money that the government has to borrow every year to to keep the government functioning. That does not change no matter how you call it, one way or the other. Next year, the government has to borrow over $600 billion in the bond markets in order to keep the government functioning. That is almost a record. Last year, it was a record at $630 billion. The way that the government is spending is just far too expensive for Canadians.
But by the same token, the parliamentary budget officer did say that Canada's debt as a share of GDP will decline over the next 30 years. And he actually said it gives the Liberal government a sustainable fiscal position. Does that not give you any level of comfort?
Well, the government has not met any deficit or debt reduction targets that it set forward. So I am not comforted by the government's own projections. In 2015,
but this is the parliamentary budget officer. With respect, it's the parliamentary budget officer that's saying that they're on a good fiscal track, or a sustainable fiscal track, I should say.
I think that assumes that the government will meet the projections that it is suggesting it will. The parliamentary budget officer also said in the same report that it has less than a 10%, a 7.5% chance of hitting its own fiscal anchors, which the government says are new. So I think the parliamentary budget officer is quite rightly suggesting that they are cautiously warning that the fiscal sustainability is, while it appears to be sustainable, it may not be if the government cannot meet its own projections.
Okay, Mr. Chambers, I appreciate the conversation. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it right there. Conservative international trade critic Adam Chambers, we appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me on a Friday, Mike.